Okay, in this video we're going to take a look at the coding tools in Matchlib and see how to use them to add matches to our library. So here I am on my match library page and I'm logged in, and you can be left a bit wondering how to get started. So first thing we're going to look at is how are we going to get matches into our match library, and the easiest way is through the coding tools. We can access them by clicking on this drop down list here, and you can see that I've got two coding forms that I can choose. For now I'll just choose field hockey, and we'll talk a little bit about players later on. When I click field hockey, we're brought into the new game screen. We can click new game, and this is where we're going to enter some information about the game that we're about to start coding. So we'll just say the home team is AAA and the away team is BBB. We'll leave the date here, and we'll send ourselves an XML file once our coding session's complete. So we've entered in the main details of the game, and then we can just click create. Normally at this time, this is about the stage that I would get it to before a game. So normally I've gone through this on my iPad, and I'll leave it here with my match ready, the details entered in, all ready to start when the game starts. Just before the umpires are about to blow the starting whistle, I'll click begin, and then the coding form will come up. And here we can see we've got lots and lots of buttons. It's quite a detailed form. We've got a timer that started at the top. We can stop and save. We can also pause. So if I click pause, the timer pauses at 15 seconds and I can resume that. We'll talk a little bit about the timer a bit more once we get started. And we've got this period button here. I like to hit the period button when the ref or the umpire blows the whistle to begin the game. And what this does is it'll insert a marker into the timeline, and I can use the marker later on to line up the video exactly to the point where the whistle was blown, and it means that I know the rest of my coding is going to be in alignment with the umpire's whistle, with the events in the game. So as the game goes, we're going to hit some buttons. So let's say there was a shot at goal by the home team, or it was a difficult shot, and then the home team might have got a penalty corner, and we hit a few events here. While we're hitting these events, they're going to come up in the history, and if we accidentally hit one, we can easily just remove it. We can view a report at any time during the game just to see what's happening and get live statistics as we're going. And as we go through the game and the second period starts, we'll hit period again and do some more coding. And when we view the report, we can view it by period, and that gives us a really good view of how things have gone period by period. So we can see here in the first period, the blue team had more shots than the green team, and neither team has had any shots in the second period. And in the first period, the blue team had a corner and the green team didn't have any. So that's the way we would code through the game, clicking periods for each period during the game and coding the events as they happen. Pause is a great way if you're coding and it's not a live coding session. So I like to often code on my TV when I get home, and if I need to take a break, I can just pause the coding tool and pause the video, go and do what I need to do, and then come back and just resume the coding session. It also just allows you to have breaks while you're coding, and just makes the whole coding piece a little bit easier. Often you won't be coding on a laptop and have a full screen like this. So I'm going to jump into the browser tools here and just show you what this would look like if you had an iPad. So Chrome's got this nice little device toggle here where I can emulate other devices, and here we're emulating an iPad Pro. I'll just bump the size of that up a little bit. So you can see this form fits really nicely on an iPad, and I like to use it on an iPad during games and do live coding so that the coding's done as soon as the game's finished. You can also view it on a mobile phone, and it'll just be fewer buttons because obviously we can't fit all of these buttons in on a mobile phone interface. So that's a perfect way to code during a game, is just on an iPad. Once we get to the end of the game, we can hit stop and save. So it'll save, it'll sync our video up into the library, and here it is. We can now access it from the library and see those coded events that we've entered in. You'll see now that we've got no video attached to this match, and that's because we have to attach video separately. So here I'm going to go into my actions and I'm going to go to edit properties. We just got, this will allow us now to add a video URL. So here's where I've stored my video online. I'm using Azure, Microsoft's Azure service to store my video. It's a nice cheap service for storing video. You could also use Dropbox or a host of other different ways to store your video. I'm just going to give this a more descriptive match title. I'm going to call this, let's say, Premier League Women Semi-Final for 2019. And press save there. So now this video URL from online is now attached to my timeline. It's still stored up in another service. It's not stored in Matchlib. So they're separate services, but it's now attached to my timeline. And I can, if I play the video, I'll just mute that. You can see that we can use the timeline to jump around in the video. With the timeline, we can also export the timeline as a data file or import the timeline from a data file. So if we had the timeline file already in our file system and we didn't need to code the video again, we could simply import that XML data file using this function here. And what I'm going to do is use that now to import a file that I'd already coded. And this is the full coding for the game, as opposed to just a few coding instances that we did using the form. So let's bring that in. You can choose to append the events from this file, which means that it won't remove anything that already exists in the timeline. It will simply add them. If you don't append, it'll remove anything that you've coded previously and just bring the imported timeline in as a fresh file. I'm not going to append, so I'm just going to bring in this previously coded file. So now that we've imported that, we can see that we've got a full timeline to use. And just to prove that, if we have a look at a goal 4, you can see it takes us right to the moment. I'll just skip back 7 seconds just so we get the lead up to that goal. And there we go. So the other thing you might want to do is line events up. So we could see there that the goal, when I click on the goal, it's a little bit late. So what I might want to do is just edit that event, and that'll bring up our editor. And because I right-clicked on that event, it comes up with a filter that's set just to filter for that one event. And you can see here, the text up here will tell you how many events you're about to impact. So this filter is set for 10 minutes 56, and it will be, it's just filtered to that time. So I probably want to bump it back by, let's say, 5 seconds. So the video reloads. Now when I click on that shot, we're probably still a little bit late. The other way, so we'll take it back, but we'll do it through the actions. So the other way to edit the timeline is through the actions, and this doesn't set any default filters, so it will impact all 141 events in the match. But I might say I just want to edit goals 4, in which case it will only impact 2. And let's just take those back another 4 seconds. So now when we play the video again and we click on goals 4, we would expect to see the full lead up. So that's a nice easy way to, you can even do it on the rows. So if we wanted to move all circle entries 4 back by, let's say, 5 seconds, we can go into edit timeline, choose circle entries 4. We can even multi-select by holding down Control on Windows, and we'll bring those all back 5 seconds. And we're going to impact 70 events and move them back 5 seconds. We'll apply those changes again, and they will have all nudged backwards. And we could verify that by right-clicking on the row, viewing the clips, and just seeing that they were all lined up with where we'd hoped that they would be, and that we got enough lead time. So that's timeline editing. And as I said, that's why it's really useful to line up with the period markers. So here we've got a period marker. If we play here, we've got a little lead time. So you can see that we're pretty well lined up with the whistle. And that just means that everything else will line up. If we saw that we were, let's say, 3 or 4 seconds out there, then we could just go in, edit the timeline, and make a change for all events and just nudge them. Let's say we want to nudge them forward a little bit. So if we nudge them forward by 2 seconds, every event in the game will nudge forward. That's just resaving. And now if we click on the period, we'll probably see that it lines up much quicker. So there's less lead time lag on that. So that's timeline editing using period markers for alignment and all the options for lining up video. The final one I want to show you is from the Code New Game, the custom coding form. So by default, there's 2 coding forms. One is field hockey and one is players. If we click on players, go New Game, it's going to use the player template. We'll just put in anything in here and create and begin the game. And you see here that we've just got P1 through to P12. That just allows, it's a way to have a custom coding form, and these might represent players. You might say P1 is a certain player and P2 is another player. So you could recode the game, let's say afterwards or during the game, and then you could export that timeline once you created it. So if we create this one here, we'll just add a few P1s and P2s. If we stop and save this, we'll go back to our library and we've got this game here. Actually, if I just slot back to the library, we can see that this first game that we linked to video has a video icon, whereas the custom one that we just did doesn't have video added to it yet. So if we go in, we could export that timeline. So let's download the file. I'm going to put it in my here. Then I can go back to my library, go into my first game. Let's import the timeline. Choose that file. We're going to append events this time, and I'm going to bring that in. So what this should do is to keep all of my previously coded events, but it's added in the P's, that the P2, P3 and P6 events that I coded separately in a separate coding exercise. So you could have 2 people in the grandstand coding a game, and you could combine them later on, but it's just a nice way to be able to do that. The player coding form is actually a custom coding form. And if you come into your profile, you'll see that you've got preferences. And in preferences, we can enter up to 12 player names. So by default, it is blank, and so it will use the P1 through to P12. But if I go Bob, Phil, Kathy, and Michelle, and I save those preferences. Now when I go to the player coding form and go new game, and we'll go ZZZ and 999 and create. Now we've got the custom buttons that we just configured. So again, it's a nice way just to have a bit of flexibility for your coding. You can create custom coding forms, but that we've got a template to design the coding forms, and you submit them and get them designed by Matchlib, and they'll get added to your account as a custom coding form for yourself in the layout that you have chosen. So that's it for coding. That's the way you get your matches into the library. This is one thing I didn't show, is that last coding session that we kicked off, we didn't finalize that, and rather than losing it, Matchlib will save any games that were had been started but hadn't been finalized. They'll actually get saved to your local file system, and then you can have the option to either add them to your library or just remove them if you didn't need them. So that way you never lose any coding that you start. So that's it. Hopefully that's given you some insights into how to import and export XML using the coding forms, and then how to use some of the timeline editing tools to line up your video. That's it for today. Happy coding.